Hi and welcome to the Solid Edge online clinic for May 2014. In this clinic we're going to be looking at Solid Edge XpresRoute, basically an introduction to piping, tubing and hoses. Now we'll start with an existing assembly that we've got, and it includes some mirrored components as well. Now what we want to do, we'll switch into XpresRoute first thing, and we want to just have a quick look. We want to create some pipes from the pump to the storage tank and from the outlet of the pump to the supply tanks of the hydraulic systems. We've also got a couple of hoses and a steel pipe to create there as well. So we'll switch to a configuration that has only the components needed, just for clarity. Now let's just have a quick look at a steel pipe that we want to create. We've got a tool called Path Express. This is quite a powerful tool for generating a path between 2 points. So I'll go create my first path from these clips, and I've got parameters like the port length that the desired port length, and then it will give me a preview of some different path routes that might work for me. So I'll type in an appropriate port segment length. That one looks like it's a little bit too long, but even if you get a length that isn't quite right, what we can do with XpresRoute is we can change the layout and the configuration of these joints. We'll set up a coaxial alignment of this pipe because we want this to go through the holder here, and as you can see that actually breaks the alignment of the bottom joint, so I delete that relationship and I need an additional segment just to go in between the two. This is quite an easy one. I'll lock it to the XY plane and I just want it to go between those two segments. Now I can also give that segment a dimension. I can give any of the segments dimensions. I'll try 50, maybe a little bit more than 50, maybe 100. And that looks like it might be a little bit too long, so I'll just back that down a little bit. 80 probably looks like a good segment length for there. Now I also want to create a coaxial alignment for the top segment. Yes, I'll remove the existing relationship into the top holder, and as you can see it's quite a quick process. Now I don't want this horizontal leg to actually be horizontal, but I do want it to stay in a planar relationship. So I'll say I want to create a parallel relationship and I create it to the XY plane, and then I'm just going to specify an angle between these two segments, and we'll start with 110. Just have a look at that. That's not a bad segment, because this tube will actually be a stainless steel formed tube. Once I'm happy with my path, I just enter the tubing and click tube. I give the tube a name, select a material, and I'll call it stainless, and I've got various bend parameters that I can specify. I might have a minimum bend radius, I might have an outer diameter, I can have a minimum flat length and my thickness. Then I select my path and get the preview. I can just right click to preview. So that gives me a quick preview along that path using the bend radii that I've specified there. Now at any point I can actually go back in and change the parameters. I'll just hide this top end because I also want on this pipe, I want some end treatments, and for example I might want to extend the end a little bit, and then I'll actually have an expansion. Now I'll just show you the different types of joints. or the different types of ends. I want an expansion, and let me see, I'll probably specify something around a 60mm, somewhere around there, and how deep, i.e. how long the expansion goes for, and the radius. Then I'll just preview that, and you can see the expansion for the end of the tube, and that will just give the pipe something to lock onto. I'll just do the same for the other end, because both of them have, hoses, not pipes. Both of them have connecting hoses that we want the hose clamp to lock onto. So that's a very quick look at just what's called a tube, which is a formed metal tube created, and you can see it's got the treatment on both ends there. Now the next segment I could use the same Path Express method, and we'll start with that, but then I'll show you some other alternatives to Path Express. And I want this to go from the very end. This will be a rubber flex hose. So I'll select the end, both ends, and I'll type in a segment length, for example. Then I'll just flick through and look at the preview of the different types, and there's probably the best pipe size for us. And now again I'll go and create or alter some of these relationships just to make the path run exactly where I want it to run. So that's probably not bad. So I'll call it tube. It's still using the tube command, but this time it's going to be a rubber flex hose, and obviously I specify slightly different parameters given that it's a hose, not a solid piece. And I need about an 8mm wall for this. I'll give it a reasonably large bend radius, and we'll have a look at that. Now at the moment you could probably manufacture this with some of the newer methods of manufacturing hoses. However, it's not really what you'd expect if you were to get a piece of hose off the shelf and try and get it to fit into these connectors. So we'll just modify that again, see if we can get a little bit closer. And you see this one, there we go. It's probably reasonably close, however it still looks like a preformed hose, which is not really what we're after in this case. So I'll just remove that, and I'll show you another option we've got. This one here is called a curve segment, and what it does is it takes an existing linear path, and you can map it through the midpoints of that existing path, and you can see it creates quite a free-flowing curve. Now I'll just go and redefine the original hose. This is one of the beauties, you don't need to rename anything. You can just select a different path for that hose to run along, and it will then update. Now this is looking a lot more like an off-the-shelf hose that you've just sort of fitted into those places. However, it has a bit of a disadvantage in that it's very difficult to control the exact shape or the exact layout. I'm just going to split these two segments, and then we'll just update the path, or the path updates automatically. I update the hose, and it gives me a slightly more realistic version, except where you've got connectors like we've got here, it still doesn't really fit. So I'm just going to delete these components. I'll just delete the path as well for clarity, because I'm going to show you a third method of creating this specific type of hose, and it's a very, very powerful, very, very flexible method, and it uses what's called key point curve segments, and I can specify as many key points as I like to create my hose path, and it will go exactly through all of these key points that I specify. So I'm just going through and specifying everything that I absolutely need the path to go through. Now I've also got in this endpoint control, I just want to use natural because I've got plenty of key points specifying the actual path required. If you only want to use a couple of specifications, then you might tend to use the tangencies and the handles to control how long the tangent follows. Because I deleted the previous hose, I'm just going to recreate this hose with new parameters, and I can just overwrite the existing properties or the existing hose. Now you might look at this and say, well, that's even worse than the last one, and you're absolutely right at this point. However, with this method we have additional tools to alter the path, and you can see I'll just go in and edit this path here, and now I'm just going to hold down the Alt key and add new points into this path, and then I'm going to use the Orient Express tool to limit the movement of these new points in just the directions that I want. I can limit the movement to anywhere on a plane or along a selected axis, and I'm just going to try and tweak this to this point to give me just a nice flow around the corner, but in still a quite natural method. And I'll just move this point out a little bit further as well. I'll just rotate around to another view. That looks pretty good from that view, so let me just switch it again. There we go, and this side looks okay. I'll just bring this entry point down, grab my Orient Express, reposition that so it's sitting where I want it to, and then I'll say on that plane, limit the movement to that plane. I'm just going to bring it down so it flows into basically the other components. You can see I can tweak this till my heart's content. Once I've done that, I'll accept my path, and then I'll just use an Alt-U command to update. This goes away and updates the hose, which you'll see in just a second. Now, the point of this is to actually create a naturally flowing path that you could actually fit from an off-the-shelf hose. Now that's looking pretty close, except just a little bit too close on the edge here. So I just come back in, I'll limit my movement to just along that axis, bring it out a little bit more, and then I'll use a different update relationships command this time. Tools, update all links, just to show you the other options for updating. And then we get the updated hose just in a second. Here we go. And that shows you how you can generate paths that you could actually lay an off-the-shelf hose quite quickly and easily. And yet it's still a very well-defined path. Now we'll just go in and we'll continue creating this time the pipe routes. We've done the hoses or the tubes. This time we'll do pipe routes, and I'll specify my port length, and we'll have a look. I'm pretty happy with that, except I might not want these to all be orthogonal. I might want to specify that it's on that plane, but it has, for example, a 2-degree drop. Now, often in reality you do get pipe segments that have a gravity drop or something like that. Now we can also, so that's specified that one, we can also just quickly specify the next pipe run, and I'll have a 500mm length in there, and I'm happy with that. So let's start generating these pipes. Now you just use the pipes command. Be aware that some of the standard parts components are an additional add-on. However, you can see here I've used select from standard parts. You also have an option to browse for fittings, which you can use if you haven't purchased the standard parts piping. Now I'm just going to specify the fittings on the end. It doesn't automatically place the fittings on the end, they're up to you to choose. And lastly, I'll just preview that, and I'm happy with that. However, what happens if I want to put a valve in this bottom leg? Well, I'll just go and split it, and I wanted to show you this after I've actually created the pipe route, because sometimes these are quite inflexible to edit after you've created. So I've split it. Now I've just got to select the valve that I want to put in there, and you can see there's an awful lot of valves that I could choose from. I'll just sort this by the size, and I want a 80mm, probably a 16 bar, and there's my valve. Now what happens if the valve is actually in the wrong orientation? Well, that's not a problem for Solid Edge, because what we can actually do, I'll just finish this, I can actually select the valve, and I can alter, for example, which side the fitting goes on, and also the orientation of my fitting as well. So I've got full control over how and where my fittings get placed. It's quite a nice little tool set. So I'll just create the next pipe route. I'll do it in the same manner. I'll select that I want my threaded malleable cast iron fittings, and I'll go in and select my ends. This is basically just to show you that it is actually quite quick to create these complex pipe routes with all of the fittings, all of the correct cut lengths, and everything that you need to specify it. So I'll just turn on everything else, and then I'll turn on the pipes as well. Now currently you'll see that I've only created one side of this route. I've got to create another side. So as before, I could use Path Express, or I can create my segments manually, and I can just lock to a plane or an axis, and I can use hotkeys to lock to this as well. And as I draw, I can also specify key points that aren't actually in line. Now what I want to do, I've created it, I just want to come down and edit the existing pipe route and say, well, actually I want to make it follow further along, not just the path that I've got. Note it automatically changes the elbow to a T, and then I've just got to specify the other flange on the other end and hit finish, and it's done. So it's very, very quick and easy to use this XpresRoute to generate complex paths for pipes, fittings, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, what happens if I want to start putting additional control and additional dimensions on? I have the option of just placing these dimensions and editing them. I might want to, for example, grab this entire vertical tank, and I might just want to drag it or edit the relationships. Now, ideally, I would want the pipes to update just as they've done here, and that just reduces the time to generate your finished drawings, because any modifications or changes the client might request even at a later stage are fully handled, and I can just make those changes. All of the pipework flows and updates. Now, I just want to also, I've got to mirror these components as well. So I just select them, and using just the standard mirror command, it's quite happy to create mirrored components. Oops, I need to turn on the reference planes to mirror them about. Which one is it? There we go. So I just select my reference plane to mirror about, and it brings up my mirror toolbox or dialog, and this has quite an advantage here, because I can, instead of just selecting the standard mirror, I can give it a new name like number 2 or left hand side or right hand side, and it just means easier file management. So I've now created my 2 left hand side. You can see the preview, and then I finish, and it actually goes and creates those parts and places them in the assembly. Now, I haven't as yet updated the orientation of that valve, so I'll just go back and fix that up. That changed when I altered the dimension, so I'll just change the orientation back to 0, and I've now got a completed piping assembly. What we can do, however, before we leave the assembly, is we can use our configurations to make drafting this a whole lot easier. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually use the select tools, and I'm going to create a couple of queries. The first query will be a query for hoses, and I'm just going to create a query so that any file with the name hose in it gets selected. Next, I'm going to create a query for pipes and tubes, because pipes and tubes both have a common tube in the name of them. Now, we also want to create a particular configuration, and that will contain only the original pump components. So I just hide all of the new piping components, just go into my configurations, create a new pump components configuration, and I'll just say OK to that. Then what I'm going to do is show all my components again, select my hoses and my pipes, just with the shift key held down in between, and then I'm actually going to activate my pump components configuration. Lastly, I'll go to show hide component, and for these piping components I'm going to hide the solid bodies or the design bodies and turn on the center lines. Now, this makes a very easily viewable configuration, but just to show you, you can do it any way you want. I'm turning on the mirror components just to have them displayed as normal components. Now what I'm going to do is create what's called an assembly snapshot. Actually, before I do that, I'll just also show the valve. And I'll minimize these and create what's called an Assembly Snapshot. Now this enables me to basically save all of the show hide configurations in my assembly, and I can then use that in my drawing that I create. So I'll just come over to the drafting. I'll change my display configuration as soon as it comes up to my snapshot, and I'll use the configuration visibility. Then I'll select my front view, just select a good scale, and bring in my view. I'll also bring in a couple of other views, and you can see how by not showing all of the pipes, the views are actually quite visible. I'll just turn on hidden view for my last view. Just bring that over, and I'll just go into the properties and just hide basically the edges that are hidden by other parts. I'll just do that for a couple of views, update the views, and you'll see that I can quite easily put on very, very clear dimensions for these piping segments, and this is because I've actually hidden the display bodies. And I'll also put on an angle dimension, which just helps me display very clearly what's needed in my dimension, or in my pipe runs. Now I can also dimension in my 3D environment. Now before I forget it, you'll notice I'm not actually dimensioning the more difficult components here. That does take a little while. However, be aware that when you come into piping, you've got an option of using what's called a pipe bend table, and you create them from the parts themselves for the very, very difficult sort of almost freeform components. Now I'm just going to turn back on the visibility of all the components after I've added the dimensions, and you can see it just enables very simple and easy to follow dimensions for my components. Now I want to create a parts list. This parts list I'm selecting creates a separate sheet. It makes a very, very simple layout, particularly for hoses and things. Now I want to go in and bring up the property manager, but I've just got to save my file first. Then I can bring up my property manager, and very often in a design you'll come to the drafting stage before you realize you've forgotten to put titles in various components. That's exactly what's happened here. So that's what I'm going to do here. We'll call them, the right hand return line, then followed by the left hand return line. Go down a bit further, and we've got the right hand supply line and the left hand supply line. Now this will go through and update the actual part properties, so it's quite a powerful and useful little tool. Just update the parts list. So I've now got a complete parts list. Now we might want to clean up the drawing view a little bit more as well, because it's quite important for clarity. We can just drag these balloons along. We can push other balloons along, or we can use the Alt key, detach and reattach it somewhere else. I can do that for both the balloon and the anchor. And I'll just move this one just so it's all looking a little bit more clear. So that's a quick look at some of the uses of XpresRoute in detailing and drafting. The next clinic we've got is using adjustable parts and assemblies, That will be on the 26th of June. If you've got any questions about what you've seen, by all means please review this webinar online at the Edge PLM YouTube channel or on our website, or you can email support@edgeplm.com.au or give us a call on 1300 883 653. So thank you very much for watching.